Greetings, heroes. How's it going? Today we've got an amazing interview with Elijah. He's a friend of Unbowed, and in his normal day job, he works with artists, producers, and builds a community together here in the local scene. He's got some amazing insight into what's going on in the music industry right now, how things are changing, and he's just a great guy to have a conversation with. So, hold on, get ready. I'm David. This is Unbowed. All right, I am here with Elijah. How you doing, man?
I am not too bad. I am doing okay. It's Friday, so I'm pretty pumped. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. It has been a very busy day here at Unbowed Productions. We talked with Jamie a bit earlier today, and just getting to hang out with people has been fantastic. And then you come along, you're like, "Hey, dude, can we do one at 5 o'clock?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure. Let's do this. Let's have some fun."
Yeah, let's do it. Let's squeeze it out, right?
Exactly. So, Elijah is. I'm talking to the audience, I guess. Elijah is one of these sort of unsung jobs. I don't want to say hero, but if the shoe fits, who works sort of in the other side of the industry of the content creation industry. And I'm going to let you talk about what you do.
Yeah, for sure. So, I guess my official title, I'm the marketing director for Radio Western 94.9 FM. So, we are London's only campus and community station. We're the only one that has a mandate to not play top 40 music. So, we're very based in the community. My job specifically is to market our shows, get our host names out there, and make sure that the city knows that the city and the campus knows that we exist and what we're here to do, which is kind of uplift the community, whether it be community events, local artists, all of that type of stuff. We just like to bring all the music together.
And that, I think, is what's really, really important, is because particularly with corporate driven radio and iTunes and Spotify and all that sort of stuff, there's this high push to get the top 40 stuff out there because that's what makes the money for them, and to constantly put it into rotation. Whereas with the community based system, you're looking at what people like, I guess is the way to say it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's a huge part of my job where it's understanding and really measuring what music is getting the best reaction, seeing when people are tuning in and tuning out, seeing what works, even on social media, what works and what doesn't work, and then just fine tuning it from there on out. And that includes anybody that listens in London or anybody that listens to our stream online from all over the
Mhm.
world. But yeah.
And you just hit on one of maybe the most important things, is this balance between the art but also finding the audience, and that what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, it's not always an easy job. I mean, especially because again, we're one of the only station, or we are the only station, I believe, in London that plays such a wide array of genres and music and different programming that it's hard to find an audience when our selection and our programming is so varied.
Hmm.
Uh, it's we fall into different niches, but it all comes together as one community, which is always kind of great at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. And I've been going on about Unbowed and the community building and that sort of thing. And it's this understanding that we're not just that the whole industry is turning away from the here's this genre, here's that genre. It's not that we're trying to destroy genres or anything. It's just that there is such crossover and cross bleed that a community isn't just a hip hop community or a rock community or whatever. I mean, I was watching TikTok. That was my first mistake. And there's actually this fun guy on there. I can't remember what his actual thing is, but if you do the search for "metal guy walks into the studio," and there's this comment about, he was doing this one song. He's like, metal and rap don't mix, and I'm like, that was like the late '90s, early 2000s. That's all it was.
Yeah, exactly.
But we've moved away from it, and I think that in many ways we've compartmentalized, we've capsulated each other again into your hip hop, your rock, your metal, your And then all the, categories of metal, because they really like to subdivide.
Hmm.
And rap as well,
Yeah.
the hip hop community, you know. So I guess from your point of view, when you're looking at this community aspect, what are the important things that you look at?
In regards to just like us connecting to that community,
Or
or
building that community and sort of fostering it within the radio station and then in London itself and da 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 da.
as long as it's our community is London, so that's kind of the market and the community that we're trying to foster. It doesn't matter what kind of genre you subscribe to. In fact, we genuinely encourage crossings of genres, because genres kind of tend to put us in a box and put artists in a box in general. So we like to see people go outside of that. But our community is local.
Mhm.
There's a huge push for. There's always been a scene, a really thriving music scene in London. It's just it doesn't get a lot of attention, unfortunately.
Mhm.
So we do whatever the best we can to let people know about it, where to be, even when venues keep getting shut down, or like a pandemic happens and it wipes out all of the live shows. All that type of stuff happens, but we try to find, okay, that happened, we adapt. Where can people go to get this music now? Where can people, can they tune into us? Yes, they can. So let's try to push that and build that community, keep that community alive and from falling apart as best we can.
And you hit on it, and I think that from what you said, it can be very easily extrapolated into Ontario in general and then Canada in general. How often has Canadian musicians, if they're big or whatever here in Canada or in parts of Canada, the second you leave Canada, nobody's ever heard of them. And all these collaborations that should be going on just don't exist because of these, as you said, nobody really knows about it, or it's a small niche community.
Right.
So and you talked about the pandemic, and it's one of those things I hate talking about, but it's been so vital in how it's affected the content creation scene. It doesn't matter what genre of art you're in, but also how it's affecting moving forward. So I guess we'll talk first off about how has it affected you personally, both just in your life in general, if you want to talk about it, obviously, and your music consumption.
As far as me personally, the beginning of the pandemic was probably as rough for me as it was for everybody, or as for most people, I would assume. At least generally the people I spoke to. It was on a personal level, it was quite a hurdle to kind of leap over, and it felt like one that wasn't certainly I wasn't prepared for, let alone one that I thought I would even be capable of doing. Because I had at that point, I had no idea what the outcome of anything would be. Would I still have a job? Would the station survive? Would I make it out of this with my sanity still intact? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, my just anxiety and just going through the roof because of not knowing, being so uncertain. You know, I was told, as a young kid, that we tend to fear the unknown,
Mm-hmm.
and that's always kind of resonated with me. So when this hit, when the pandemic hit, and all of us were on our own, uh, everybody was confused. From the lowest of the ladder to like the highest highs.
Mm-hmm.
In the government, like that. We were all trying to get through it. Nobody knew, so we were on our own, and that created such a hostile and just confusing place in my head. Um, but I think now that we're hopefully nearing the end,
Mm-hmm.
it's getting a little bit better. As the years have progressed, it's gotten a little bit easier to adapt to it. But that's all I have to remember to keep me going, is that you gotta adapt. You gotta keep going. And I've been good at adapting in the past. So now I just have to apply it to, every aspect of my life, because every aspect of my life changed.
And before we start getting into anything else, I have to stop there and just for a second and really highlight what you just said, because what you just said is so important for so many people, because I think throughout this pandemic, throughout everything, we've all felt alone and isolated. Literally, we were in isolation. And so many people I've talked to, artists, normal people that aren't in this industry, that are in other things, have felt that they were the only ones going through what you just described. And I think as we come out of this, and you'll see Anthropology Dave come out here in a second, as we start finding essentially the oral history of the pandemic, we're going to find that we were all experiencing the same thing, or at least a variation therein. So I really just want to highlight what you specifically just said, because that is so important for people to hear. So thank you for that. And now let's move on.
Yeah, absolutely. And no, you're absolutely right. Thank you for that, because that's something that even I had to. I was living at home when the pandemic started. And I guess when I say I was living at home, I was living with my parents. And so when I moved on, about somewhere between that, I was kind of just kept in this little bubble, this little echo chamber when it started. But eventually I moved out, got a roommate, and then I realized, oh, he was also going through this. And it's funny that all the friends that I'm talking to, all the coworkers I still have to talk to, they're also going through this. So I figure, you put two and two together, or at least I put two and two together. If everybody I'm talking to is going through a similar variation of what I'm going through,
Mhm.
we're not as alone in this as we might think. So that was just something that kind of tried to keep me going, tried to get me to adapt as best as I could, and tried as best as many times as we got locked down, as many times as that happened, just keep pushing forward, because there is an end in sight, which we're now hopefully seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Now to the music consumption, my music consumption, I would say it probably increased over the course of the pandemic. Obviously, I had more time on my hands, so there was there was music to be explored, and I always loved exploring music anyway. But my taste got a little bit more varied, for sure. Um, I'm definitely a hip hop head, as they come, as they're called. But I was able to kind of get back to more of how do I describe this? I started just seeing associated acts with hip hop, or just not associated at all, and I just started giving them shots, and I started collecting records and vinyl right before the pandemic started.
Mm-hmm.
So seeing the local record shops like Odyssey and Speed City, and Grooves, them all putting their new stuff online, I was able to say, oh, let me listen to that. Is that something I'd like to add to my collection? And through that, I got some amazing recommendations. I had never even, it's almost embarrassing to say, but I had never even heard of like Funkadelic before the pandemic. So right,
I don't
right.
know if I'm, like, congratulations, welcome to the brotherhood here for a minute, or that slight element of disappointment.
No, and that's exactly it. Like I had heard of
Mm-hmm.
them, I had known of them, but I had never actually listened to an album of theirs. So my introduction to them, like, it was immediately just a visceral
Mm-hmm.
one. So I knew, and as soon as I put on that record, I knew I had to dive deeper.
Mm-hmm.
So I started buying records just based off of, oh, I saw Odyssey, say something about this one, that they have this one. The cover art looks cool. Let me see what it's about.
Yeah.
And so I just got way more, I explored a lot more during the pandemic, and it really opened my eyes to something that I have tried to approach music now, and most things with my life now, with curiosity rather than judgment.
Mm-hmm. That's
So always approach something as, okay, let's see what this has to offer, rather than just be like, oh, that doesn't look like it would interest me,
mm-hmm.
because you never know what you might find.
Well, and it's interesting because I've loved hip hop my whole life, growing up in and around Toronto, and being tangentially involved in the underground scene a little bit, and just seeing what was there.
Right.
It's amazing how many of them, how many people, and this isn't just the hip hop community, but I find it particularly interesting with the hip hop community, that they don't listen outside of their own genre. And it's
Mhm.
really, really weird in that most of the hooks that they're using and the beats that they're using are sampled from other genres.
Right.
And
Right.
it's the hip hop guys who really start delving, mostly. I'm not, no shade on anybody, but the guys who are the producers who are diving into other genres and are well versed in other genres are the guys that are pulling these bizarre hooks out of somewhere, and it just works so well with the artists that they're working for. So,
Hmm.
having the opportunity to expand your horizons, and not even so much who you're listening to, that you've started to expand who you're listening to, like not
Yeah.
not the specific artist, but across the genres.
Yeah, exactly. Who might have influenced them? Who
Hmm.
might have influenced the person who influenced them? So it's like, yeah, just going back, and it's funny that you mentioned samples because I got into a habit over the pandemic as well. If I listened to a song and I heard that there was a very clear sample in it, I got into the habit of going on, I think it's whosampled.com, finding the song, finding the original sample where it came from, and I just listened to that. So I have to, cause I want to know its origins. I want to know its roots, right? So
And that's just it, because and you hit the nail on the head right there again. It's who influenced that sample, who influenced the
yes,
producer to use that sample, where did that sample came from, who influenced the artist there, where can you draw it back from, going back to the roots, as you said, and just expanding your musical vocabulary when it comes to what can be combined and put together, and how it all blends together.
yeah, and I think that there's, like you said, it is generally the producers that I also find are the ones that are more likely to go outside of their comfort zone and find new things. And I think that has something to do with the fact that like the rappers themselves, if they pull from lyrics or flows that were used back in the 80s or
Hmm.
90s, it's almost seen as a negative. It's almost seen as like, oh, you're just recycling an old flow. You're biting this kind of the style rather than creating your own. Whereas sampling, especially after people like Kanye West started getting so heavily involved with it,
Hmm.
it's something that is now regarded as okay. Go and find the most obscure sample you can. Go find a Swiss band from 1950s and see what they had and find a way to incorporate it into your music, because then it won't sound like anything else that's out there, which is kind of
Yeah, and it is weird, and I've recently gone back into some of my older, late '80s, early '90s, mid '90s hip hop stuff, because and not like the MC Hammer and Vanilla Ice type stuff, but like you start getting into like when Busta first started hitting there, and some of his underground stuff, or even Dre when he was early in his career. You want to throw it onto the the sort of the Canadian side. There's Maestro, obviously, as your sort of introduction to it, but the guys that he worked with, and you talk about sort of an amazing genre that never found anything outside of his niche. You look at him and Snow, and oh, who's the other one? All these producers working in and around Toronto and around the Jane area, and they were putting out artists and albums all the time, and they never found anything more than an immediately local market.
hmm
you know
yeah.
but you talk about sort of biting the flow back, and people getting all mad about it, but part of it I think comes from jealousy, because that's what the foundational thing is about, but nobody can do like the dash thing, like what, like Busta could when he's hitting his groove,
Yeah.
or that, or just that. I don't have the vocabulary to describe it, but that slow flow that Dre would put on
hmm
early back in the early days. And we just turned into a hip hop head conversation, because I don't get to talk about it that
Yeah.
much with people, but
Yes.
so transfer, like, and here's, I guess, where we can bring it back to what we were talking about earlier. One of my favorite things that I used to go to were just old school rap battles. I mean, we didn't really call it that back in the day, but just a couple artists up on stage just throwing it down to whatever they got. And those venues are gone. I was talking with Jamie today about a couple other venues in Toronto that have closed down, and you look here in London, and I honestly, the first victim of the pandemic was Call the Office.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
they just announced, I can never remember the name of it. It's Old East.
765?
That's the one.
Is it 765? 365?
No,
Something like that.
it's 7, 8. Those guys.
Yeah. Apologies.
We apologize to them, but most of the time in London, you say Old East, and everybody's like, "Yep, we got you."
This bar, gotcha. Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
but yeah,
so
it went out too.
you've seen it, particularly from the community aspect, the decimation that this has had, and particularly on the local scene. But then we can use that as sort of a macro and microcosm. How has the venue situation and the lack of a live performance space really affected the community from your point of view?
It's certainly put a it's certainly put a bit of a damper on things for sure. The live venues, it's getting fewer and fewer, as you said. So now we still have some left, but they're the relatively bigger ones already. That were already larger than the Old East Bar or Call the Office. So now we're kind of left with Budweiser, um, the Aeolian, which is one of the smaller ones, London Music Hall, Rum Runners,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a couple more that I'm forgetting, and sorry for that. But those are the main ones that I see a lot of artists try. But on the flip side of that, I've seen a lot of people utilize other spaces as well as performance spaces as well.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's, yeah, use the word spaces twice, but they are using other spaces as performing settings now. So I've seen people. There was this. I think they were called the Essence Awards, and they were held in February. They were celebrating Black culture and Black music in London, Ontario,
Mm-hmm.
and it was held at a Jamaican uh, restaurant slash nightclub. So like they're being very creative, and they're finding new ways, which is kind of how you find the new best spots anyways. You try something out, you're like, hey, we don't have this option anymore, let's try option B.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see if this can work. So you are seeing a lot of that in the city. It is a shame that some of these more prominent ones are getting shut down. It's always unfortunate to see that. But in what's the saying? In the ashes rises a phoenix,
Mm-hmm.
or something like that. Yeah. So you are seeing smaller venues come out, like much smaller venues, but that almost makes it more personal. So I actually kind of see that side of it as a huge positive. When you can build a smaller community and you just kind of build out that way,
Mm-hmm.
just from having to do it because you had no other options.
And I think that is, I was looking at it as I was initially talking about this as sort of a microcosm to look at the whole Canadian macrocosm. But I think in another way, what you're talking about is the changes that the industry is going through right now.
Absolutely.
What you got used to, the places that you got used to, that you formed the habits of looking into, of checking their websites and see who's performing there, and then looking into that music, or your Discover Weekly from Spotify, or your whatever. That kind of didn't work anymore, and now we're all forced to find a new way of doing things. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just something that we've had to, going back to it. It's the word that has resonated with me the most over the pandemic. It's adapt.
Mm-hmm.
Find something that you find an issue that especially that this pandemic has caused. You got to find a workaround. We're not just going to let the music community in London die. There's no way in hell that's happening. So, we find a new avenue. We find a new place to link up. We find a venue to perform. We find new people to perform.
Mm-hmm.
There's people are hungry no matter where you go. You just gotta be looking. Just gotta be looking in the right
Man,
places.
you just described Unbowed to a T, so that's perfect.
Why would
And we do, and your expertise in these areas is really appreciated, and even just sitting here and chatting, there's people who are sitting here going, okay, that makes sense. I'm not the only one thinking this way, and if I'm not the only one, then there's got to be more. And you just got to find those like-minded people.
exactly?
One quick thing I want to sort of hit on before we switch gears or whatever is your background in music. I know the answers to these questions. I'm prompting.
My background. In what way do you mean?
Okay, so I know you graduated from university.
Correct. Yes.
And
Okay.
sort of that going forward, like Elijah, who entered university, who graduated high school. I'm making assumptions. Um,
Yep.
you know, did he ever think that he would be so heavily involved in the music and art scene as he is now?
Yes.
Oh.
I come from a place of I dabbled in instruments growing up. Obviously, I was forced to play the recorder. I took piano lessons. I got really attuned to drums, and I still have my set. But I really am. If there's one instrument I have gotten closest to perfecting, it would be drums. And I got into that right at the tail end of elementary school, going into high school, and then carried me all throughout high school. Around the same time, I started getting more into rock and hip hop. So that transition kind of happened over my high school life, and my love for music always remained.
Mhm.
Whether I was playing a different instrument or not, my love for music and media in general, which is why I graduated from Western in their media information technoculture program. But yes, the hope was always to work in the music industry, or at the very least, be surrounded by creatives, um, but preferably in the music industry. So when the opportunity came to work at Radio Western, it was a no brainer.
Mm-hmm. There was always this element of keeping the arts within your life, and finding the path to what you wanted to do.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Um, how often were obstacles thrown in that path? I guess is what I, like we're in my personal journey, when I first started talking about coming back to university as a mature student and stuff like that, there was always a person sitting there going, "You're too old. It's going to cost a fortune. You're never going to get out of it." There was always somebody trying to stop me. So
Right.
you said that like the music had always been a part of it, and that was always part of the goal. Talk about the other side of it, the people who, not necessarily out of malice, but most of the time it usually comes from a place of concern, but it certainly makes it even worse in some regards.
Yeah, for sure. And as soon as you enter, anytime you ever try to tell somebody like, "Oh, I work in music," the like I don't know about your experiences, but at least in my experiences, quite often the answer is like, "Oh, oh, really? Okay." But like, what's the backup then?
Hmm.
There's always that backhanded compliment of like, "Oh, that's cute. What are you gonna do when you grow up?" So, because it's not seen as sustainable and it's not seen as a real job. So even though I knew I wanted to work with artists and with musicians, with creatives, with artists, I knew that it was going to be challenged, and I was challenged at just about every stage of that. Even people going as far from saying like, "Oh, that's cute," talk to me when you want a real job, or going as far as to say like, "Okay, so that's cool. So you're moving to Toronto? So you're moving to LA, like to New York?" It's like, no, like I want to kind of I want to build in London right now. Oh, okay. Are you sure? Like, is there anything even going on in London? That type of
Hmm.
thing. There's there's a lot of pushback, just in the arts in general, but especially in even going more so into London. Like there's growing up, there was even throw back to the hip hop side, as someone who really enjoyed hip hop and really liked looking for local hip hop artists, listening to Radio Western or Fanshaw's station as well. There was a huge stigma around being a London rapper, um, and it's almost seen as like a demeaning type of title to have.
Hmm.
Uh, so there was a stigma of working with people like that growing up, and it's something that I constantly had to keep in my mind, to not ignore, but to almost prove them wrong,
Mm.
that there is a value. There's a very valuable culture in this city that doesn't seem to be in the spotlight, but I think
Hmm.
should. So my goal has always been to kind of push that forward and bring that spotlight to that scene.
From my own personal experiences and what happened with me and grad school and all that sort of stuff, one of the biggest things, and I'm going to try not to swear too much, but FU is one of the biggest motivators in life. You
Absolutely.
know, there were some dark moments in there for me, particularly around the pandemic and stuff. And there is, I don't, you've probably seen it, but it's Muhammad Ali's press conference with George Foreman just before their first fight. And that's when he's sitting there going, I'm tough, you know, like I murdered a rock, I injured a stone,
Yeah.
one of my favorite lines was, I went home and I was headed to bed. I flipped the switch and I was under the covers before the lights went dark. You know, but right at the end of that, he goes, "You're all doubting me. You all don't. I know you got him. He's the best guy." And he looks straight at the camera and goes, "I'm going to show you how great I am." And
Mhm.
that fu motivating power when somebody comes across and says you can't do this, oh, you're just a London rapper, you're just a London musician, and it's, in some ways it's even worse for the smaller communities as you go out, you're just a wannabe, why aren't you from Toronto? Only the good ones are from Toronto, or Vancouver, Montreal, the big three. And that motivator to sit there and go, watch me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Push through at any given moment. And it's funny because there's it's funny because as a London musician, you'll be sold like, oh, go to Toronto. That's where the real thing is at. But if you go to Toronto, you'll realize they have the same. There's a lot of people there with the same mentality too, where it's like, oh yeah, we're in Toronto, but we're not New York. We're
Mm-hmm.
not LA. They're just constant. There's always a constant battle between the second rate mentality. And that's kind of what it comes down to, is the
Mm-hmm.
mentality, is not thinking of yourself as a second class to another city. There's so much culture here to explore, Toronto and London. There's so much culture here. So we're much better to focus on this community itself and uprise raise
Mm-hmm.
ourselves up rather than sending everybody off to a different city or sending them off somewhere else where it's considered real, because then that actually makes the mentality real.
Well, I
So
wonder how much of that is fear of success. People don't want you to succeed, so they're going to put you down. And then the other side of the coin is that, like, we all, anybody who's creative, anybody who's trying to do something, has that massive imposter syndrome. And when
hmm
you hear, oh,
yeah,
you're just a London artist, it's so easy to sit there and go, yep, see, they're right. When in
yeah,
reality, it doesn't matter if you look at some of the biggest guys in the world. It doesn't matter where you came from. It's the talent that you have and the people that you
yes,
surround yourself to help nurture that talent. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
And
Yeah, I
no,
don't.
please.
Oh, I was gonna say, I mean, just to build off that point, I mean, it's wild to me that places like London, well, yeah, it's wild to me that places like Toronto even have a second-rate
Mm-hmm.
mentality when arguably one of the biggest pop stars in the world right now, three of the biggest pop stars in the world right now are from Toronto, and people still have this mentality. Oh, you got to go here, you got to go there. It's like it doesn't matter where you're from; it matters the talent that's
Mm-hmm.
behind it. So, yeah, I mean, it's not like Drake, The Weeknd, or Justin Bieber all were found in their hometowns. Like no, like it's the talent that they brought to the table.
Exactly.
It's their musical abilities. So whether you're from Toronto or whether you're from London, whether you're from Woodstock, St. Thomas, Sarnia, and it's the talent that you bring. And if you believe in yourself, that hopefully is enough to keep you pushing.
Exactly. And I think that, again, not, to push the unbowed, or just the community in and of itself. The more community you surround yourself with, the more people who are sitting there going, you can do this, because they understand that it's not a zero sum game. If you succeed, we all succeed, because we're all going to lift each other up together. And you look at, that's why you've got the hip hop crews and stuff from back in the day. They were all pulling each other together and making each other better as they went along. We finally started to see it sort of in the rock community, as they start, sort of collaborating with each other and going, we're not pulling away from each other's audiences, we're just growing the audience. you
Mm-hmm.
know but the other side of it is, we're also in an era, and I think this is the good side of the internet, the good side of social media, is that you can put yourself out there and show the world your talent. Now, the downside is there are going to be those people who are going to put you down. But
Yeah.
but it doesn't matter. They're always going to be there.
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, and there's always going to be, like you said, there's always going to be people trying to drag you down. Even your own thoughts are going to try to drag you down eventually. That's with anything.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, yeah, it's I don't want to say like just ignore it, because it's really easier said than done. But trying to move past that, trying to adapt to and trying to believe in yourself more than you believe what others are saying.
Exactly.
To the
All right, my dude. There again, you're going to be one of those guys that it's no secret here. Elijah is one of the major uplifters and pieces of Unbowed production. He's been sort of with me from the start when I came up with this crazy idea, and he is an integral piece of this puzzle. So we're going to be chatting again. We're going to be talking to. So, in the comments, in our Discord and stuff like that, if you've got questions for Elijah, just hit them out. He'll either see them himself, or I'll make sure that he gets them. And he's such a great guy to talk to. Like, we just sit there and have good conversations all the time. And you could just see it. Like, we wandered down the rabbit hole of hip hop, really, really quickly, so
Mm.
if you have questions, if you have thoughts, please just shoot at him. If you have questions for Unbowed in general or us, but in that, I'm going to give you the opportunity if there's anything you want to say.
Well, thank you so much for the kind words, and just thank you for everything. I mean, this Unbound wouldn't even be an idea, a twinkle in somebody's eye if it wasn't for you. So thank you for all the hard work, because I don't think people understand the amount of hard work you've put into this. Even I look at it and I'm like, and I'm overwhelmed by it. So thank you for doing that, because this is something that I think is
Mm.
necessary. Um, but other than that, the only thing I can say is that, as best as you can, believe in yourself. There are people like us out here that believe in you, that believe that this community, that this city, and this scene is worth saving and trying to I'm struggling to find the words, but to rise
Mm-hmm.
up. We have to lift each other up. So that's what I would say. I'm always here. Yeah, send me the questions over the Discord. I'll try my best to answer them. If you're ever in the on campus or anything like that, feel free to stop into Radio Western. I'm here. Just talk to me. Like, I won't bite. Like, I'm here. That's my job, to talk to you guys. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's I think that's it. I think that's what I got.
Perfect. We're going to leave it on that. If you like what you just saw, please give us a like, hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell so you can see all the notifications, and leave a comment. It really helps us out, and I really want to know what you guys want to hear. Welcome to the Unbowed family. We are going to be doing some amazing things in the future, and if you want to help us grow, consider subscribing, consider becoming a Patreon. Everything helps us out. We will see you in the next one. I absolutely love you all. As the man said, onward and upward to greater glory. Together, we are unbowed.